Hello, 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 hello. Welcome to Me and My Friend Pete, the podcast that explores all things The Amazing Spider-Man. I'm your host, Gerald. If this is your first time with us, welcome. If it isn't, welcome, 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 welcome back. This week, we're diving into The Amazing Spider-Man number 2, but before we get into it, I got a couple of shameless plugs. We gotta do the shameless plugs. First, our Patreon, High Society Publishing presents. There, for the low price of 5 greenbacks, you'll find not only an ad-free version of this episode of Me and My Friend Pete, but also an extra bonus episode discussing a comic from my own extensive collection. In this week's bonus episode, exclusive to patrons, we cover our first DC comic, Superman Volume 2, Number 8, Future Shock. If you're a fan of the Legion of Superheroes, this one's for you as Supes goes toe-to-toe with the Future's premier super team. And if you want a little bit more control over which comics pop up in the bonus episodes, and don't trust my random number generator to get you to a comic or hero you want discussed, a new tier called the High Council has been set up. For $7 a month, you get to vote each week from a selection of 5 comics to choose from. Power to the patrons, am I right? You can find all this extra bonus goodness at patreon.com/HSPP. That's patreon.com/HSPP. Please sign up today as your support keeps this whole operation afloat. I mean that sincerely. If you are a patron, thank you so much for being a patron. I really appreciate your support. To our newest patrons, Yana, Naldama, I say bonjour, privet, hola, hello, and all those other salutations. Welcome aboard. We're so happy to have you. And to you all, I say, look to the skies because The Amazing Spider-Man number 2 pits our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man against villains just raining down on him from above. There are 2 great stories in this one, folks. The first, Duel to the Death with the Vulture, pits Spidey against the green-clad flying menace, the Vulture. Or as we like to call him here on the Me and My Friend Pete podcast, Lincoln O Vulture. If you know, you know. In the second story, The Uncanny Threat of the Terrible Tinkerer, Spidey faces off against a master machinist with menace on his mind. So let's get into it. Without further ado, I give to you The Amazing Spider-Man number 2, Part 1, Duel to the Death with the Vulture. Me and my best friend Pete, old adventures, new critiques. He spins webs, I spin yarns, kinda kooky, be forewarned. Look out, it's me and my friend Pete. This is the Vulture's first ASM appearance, but his second on Me and My Friend Pete. He was in bonus episode number 1, covering The Amazing Spider-Man number 7, The Return of the Vulture. As I mentioned there, the comic book was the first I ever read, so anytime I get to see the winged villain in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man, I'm always geeked about it. So Amazing Spider-Man number 2's credits, we have cover and interior art by Steve Crowd Reaction God Ditko. We have the script by Stan The Man Lee. And we have lettering done by John, your letterer could never, Duffy. So let's get into it. On this cover, we have Spidey and Vulture high above the city. We have the grayed out skyscrapers in the background behind them as usual. And Vulture is above Spidey. He's wearing a smug look on his face. He's got on his green bird suit, as always. And beneath him, grabbing at his feathers, is Spider-Man. So Spidey has the shock lines above his head. He's managed to pluck a few of the Vulture's feathers from the villain's right arm, but he's falling to the earth. He's got his arms up. His legs look like he's running in the air. This is a very dramatic cover. Just looking at how Spidey has managed to yank a few feathers from the Vulture's wings, it gives me the impression in my mind that he was really grabbing at this person, trying to hang on essentially and not be falling to the earth. So is Spidey going to get out of it? We'll see. We'll see. The caption boxes tell us we've got 2 new Spider-Man thrillers and 2 new Spidey villains. The first is the Vulture, of course. For the second, we have a little picture-in-picture action. There's a smaller picture inside of this cover, So on the lower right of the cover, Spidey has his hands up. He's being blasted by a yellow beam from a ray gun held by a white hand. And there's a caption box inside of this pip saying, Spider-Man is trapped by the terrible Tinkerer. And in my opinion, it's a gorgeous cover. So we get to the first page and we've got Spidey in a much better position here on this page than he is on the cover. There's a yellow caption box. The yellow caption box says, the most colorful superhero of all, Spider-Man. His name makes the underworld tremble, but there is one who does not tremble. What fantastic power can the Vulture have which makes him so sure he can defeat Spider-Man? And in the image, we have him and the Vulture. They're still fighting above the city, but Spidey has a hold of the Vulture's left leg with his right hand, and his left hand cocked back. He's ready to strike. He's going to try to knock the Vulture's lights out. and the Vulture's looking down at him. His fists are raised. It's a beautiful, beautiful fight scene. I really love this picture. I wonder why this picture wasn't the cover, but that's not my decision to make. And it's not only because of the action poses of Spider-Man and the Vulture. I know I said in an early episode the buildings don't matter, but without them, we'd really just have Spidey fighting in a lot of negative space most of the time. So shout out to the crowd reaction god Steve Ditko, because all throughout this issue are amazing examples of his mastery of point perspective. Here we get a 2-point perspective behind Spidey and the Vulture, and that really does add excitement to their fight. It's so beautifully drawn. There are these light blue buildings behind, and it just really looks like they're in a cramped space even when they're in the air. It's a beautiful, beautiful shot. Also, I don't know if I ever mentioned it, but Lincoln O Vulture really does look like the bird he's taking his name after. He's got these thick eyebrows, a long shark nose. His nose is sharp. It looks like if he jerks his head forward, he could cause someone serious damage hitting them with his nose. It's pointed. And he's got the baldest head this side of Lex Luthor from Superman the Animated Series. Shout out to Black Lex. So we turn the page, we're on page 2 now, and we begin our story with a shot of a New York street. The caption box lets us know that there is a new menace in the city who strikes without warning or even a sound. So there are people milling about in this first panel, but at the center of the panel, we have a man in a blue suit, blue hat, carrying a brown briefcase. In the next panel, we see who that menace that they were referring to is. It's the Vulture. He swooped in from the top right of the page, and he's grabbed the man's briefcase, and he's flying off with it. And of course, the man is screaming that the briefcase was filled with a fortune in bonds. And it makes me wonder why he didn't have the briefcase handcuffed to his wrist, carrying people's money all willy-nilly in the city with no protection. That doesn't seem like a smart move. A fortune in bonds. A fortune in bonds? Handcuff it to your wrist. Stop playing games, guy. You got people flying around without sound. Stop playing games. Next panel, crowd reaction shot. We got one guy here, he's got on a black hat, it's got a brown brim around it. He's got on Clark Kent glasses, his mouth is open, he's screaming, he's got on a blue tie, black blazer. There's another guy, he's got on an orange hat, he's got blonde hair, he looks thunderstruck. There's a woman next to him, her mouth is open, she has on one of those Moroccan hats, it's red, she's got a giant earring in, and she's got a red suit on. And they are all thunderstruck. None of them can believe that the Vulture can fly. Black hat, brown brim says he's read about it, but he's never expected to see the Vulture. Guy in a brown hat says he didn't believe that the Vulture existed. Guy in an orange hat says it's impossible that he can fly. So all these people are seeing the Vulture, and none of them are believing it. They're just all thunderstruck. The woman in the red Moroccan hat, she has no words. She is in shock. Love this scene. So we move on. And in the next panel, we have a gorgeous shot of Jameson Publications. This is an all-white building, so it's maybe marble, maybe granite. And we're looking at it from the perspective of a person who's walking into the building. I just want to point out, J. Jonah Jameson's name is plastered on the front of this building. It says J. Jonah Jameson Publishing. You know who owns this building when you walk in. And that makes so much sense, seeing the type of person that J. Jonah Jameson is. Of course he's going to throw his name on the building. His name on the building is bigger than what the building is actually selling to the people. Beneath his name is a sign that says Now Magazine, but his name is way bigger and takes up way more space. Jameson wants you to know that he's the brains behind this outfit. Don't ever get it confused. And we don't see Jameson, but inside of the building, he is on his usual rampage. That's a quote. He's saying the next issue of his Now magazine will be dedicated to the Vulture because the guy's made an impact. Everyone's talking about him, but at the same time, Jameson's going to keep his eye on the ball. Jameson says, quote, "But keep printing stories about Spider-Man also. I'll never rest till that dangerous menace is destroyed." So Jameson's going to keep his eye on the ball. He's got a one-track mind. His one-track mind is Spider-Man being over, being done. Okay, the Vulture's popular right now. Well, I'm a smart paper man, and I'm going to move some paper. Shout out Dunder Mifflin. But when I'm done moving that paper, we're going to get back to business and run this menace out of town. We're going to destroy this menace. That's what he's saying. We move into Jameson's office, and he is on a tirade. He's standing behind his desk. He's got on a white shirt, teal tie it looks like, purple suit. He's still wearing his purple suit. He's talking to an editor. The editor's got on a gray shirt. The editor's got on blue slacks. And the editor in his hand is holding a picture of the Vulture, and Jameson in his hand is holding a picture of Now magazine with Spidey on the cover. And Jameson is losing it. Jameson is saying the picture of the Vulture being presented to him is not good enough. And his editor tells him that it's an artist's drawing, but JJ doesn't care. JJ wants a pic. His editor tells him nobody can get a pic, but JJ didn't get to be a tycoon by accepting what nobody can do. He says, quote, "No more excuses. Get me pictures of the Vulture or I'll get some new editors." So Jameson's going to drive his team. And he doesn't care what you think about him. His name's already on a building. That's how Jameson's giving it up. In the final panel on this page, we're at Midtown High. We've got Blondie in the room wearing a red long sleeve blouse and blue pencil skirt. We've got a strawberry blonde guy. He's holding an issue of Now magazine. A couple of other people. And to the right of them, Pete is standing. Pete's got on a sweater vest, white shirt, red tie, the blue slacks I know and love. You know them, you love them. They're back. His Steve Jobs slacks are back. And he's holding a file in one hand and taking notes with the other. And it's breaking my heart because Spidey, Peter Parker, is writing with his right hand. He is one of the many. But fun fact, Peter Parker doesn't have a driver's license, so I don't ever have to worry about being on the road and swerving into Peter Parker. So Blondie and Strawberry Blonde, they're talking, and they're saying a photo of the Vulture would be worth a fortune. So Pete's eavesdropping, and he's thinking to himself that he has a good idea, and he knows how to get those pictures. We move on to the next page, and we get an image of Strawberry Blonde. He's tossing the Now magazine at Pete, and he's saying Pete should read more about the outside world and less about scientific formulas. And Pete says, very funny, Moose. At least my brain isn't muscle bound, like that fat head of yours. That's a quote. And then Pete thinks, quote, he'd be grinning out of the side of his mouth if he ever suspected timid Peter Parker as Spider-Man. So we're starting to see a pattern. Pete will make a rebuttal, and then in his head, he'll think to himself, you don't even know what it is, bro. I'm Spider-Man. If I wanted to, I would blow your mind right now. But out of that, we get that the strawberry blonde kid's name is Moose. We finally have someone's name. I'm starting to take it as a sign of disrespect that Blondie still hasn't been given a name when she has all these speaking lines and all these cameo appearances. We have seen her in every issue of ASM so far, and we do not know her name. Blondie, I hope it comes soon. So Pete starts reading the magazine, and he thinks Spidey could get a picture of the Vulture. So that's the idea that Pete's been formulating in his mind. Nobody can get a picture of the Vulture because the guy is always flying around, but Pete stays in the skies all the time as Spider-Man, so he thinks that he can get a photo as Spider-Man. While he's thinking this, his professor walks up, and seeing him reading the magazine, his professor gets pissed. So Pete's beaker is boiling over behind him. The kids are laughing behind the professor, and he's saying he didn't expect Pete, of all people, to be ignoring his experiments to look at lurid pictures, and screams on Pete to pay attention. I think that's totally unfair because these kids were standing around in class the whole time reading this Now magazine, and the professor said not a word. So he was either not in the room, or he's ignoring the fact that these kids are not working. Then he comes down super hard on Pete because Pete is a good student. That makes no sense to me at all. You should push and drive all of these kids to be the best version of themselves and not just pick on Pete when he's not doing so. So school ends, Pete rushes home. We see Aunt May bent over a bureau. She's wearing purple. She's got an apron on, and she's handing a small camera to Pete. She says it was Uncle Ben's, and she's sure he will want Pete to have it. Pete says he's going to use it to help pay bills. We move on, and of course, Pete's suited and booted. He just needs to get the gloves on. It's a beautiful panel. We have the camera in the foreground. We have his lab equipment, as always, in the background. And he's sliding gloves on it to his hand. And he's saying he's going to attach the camera to his costume, then test it out. Because he's a scientist, and this is what a scientist does. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of the city, Vulture's hanging out in his hideout, and Vulture never takes his costume off. He is in his hideout right now, full-on Vulture mode. He has his green suit on. He's got the green wings on his arm. And he's thinking that the Park Avenue Jewelry Exchange is moving $1 million in diamonds. $1 million in diamonds in 1963. I went to in2013money.com, which is an inflation calculator. And that $1 million today is worth almost $9 million. So Vulture has the idea to steal $9 million worth of diamonds. This is not a small-time crook, although he has a small-time mind. We've already established that the Vulture is hustling backwards because those wings have to be worth a fortune. But that's not what the Vulture's about, right? Lincoln O Vulture, he's a small-time crook with big power, so he gets to steal big things. That's how I see him so far. And in the final panel, we see the Vulture with a smug smile on his face. He says they're expecting him to try to steal these diamonds. So he's already made a name for himself, and he knows that the police are going to be expecting him to try to hit these diamonds and steal these diamonds. $9 million worth of diamonds. The Vulture is brazen, if nothing else. And he's thinking to himself that he's got a plan that not even Spider-Man can stop. So they know of each other. They haven't met yet, but they know of each other. So we move on to the next page, and we see Vulture flying off towards the city from an abandoned silo in Staten Island. So they said last page that his lair was on the edge of the city, but that's not accurate because every New Yorker knows Staten Island is on the edge of the universe. And Vulture, much like Spidey web swings at over 100 miles an hour, Vulture's gotta fly over 100 miles an hour because seconds later, we're on a rooftop with Spidey and his spider sense goes off and the Vulture flies right past him. The Vulture's distracted, he's thinking about his diamond heist and the fact that nobody has figured out how he's gained the ability to fly. And Spidey spots him and calls himself lucky. The next few panels we follow Vulture as he flies around the city tossing rocks through glass windows. So Vulture's taking on, for the first part of his plan, a little bit of vandalism. He's flying around and he's throwing rocks through windows. And the first message goes through the Jameson Publishing Company window, so I know JJ is pissed. 3 people were fired, I'm sure. That editor who drew that picture, he's gone, right? All of the photographers are gone. They're not getting the pictures anyway. And now, the guy that I want you to get pictures of, he's out here breaking our windows. You're all fired. I can see it. You're all fired. I can see it. I don't know why my Jameson in that moment was Vince McMahon, but maybe I like the way Vince McMahon says, you're fired. Next, the Vulture flies to a radio station. He tosses a rock through their window as well. And finally, the last rock he has, he tosses it through the window of the police station for the chief of police. And in the final panel, the police chief is holding the letter open. We only get a shot of his hand. Well manicured. He is the chief after all, so they should be well manicured. And there are 2 other officers in the room, and the note says, I shall steal the diamond shipment from under your noses, the Vulture. So Lincoln O Vulture signs his criminal alias in script like it's a real signature. I wonder how long he had to practice that, because I know that my signature, it took me years to get comfortable with the signature that I have. How long has this man been the Vulture? He is an older man, he's up there in age, so he's probably been the Vulture a long time. Or, as soon as he became the Vulture, he went all in, and he said, that's it. Whatever my real name is, I don't need it. I'm signing my name, the Vulture, in script. And it's so strange because everything else is in print, so it's literally his signature is his criminal alias. I think that's gangsta, Vulture, I gotta say. I gotta give you credit for that. That's commitment. So the one cop who's in the room, he says the Vulture doesn't make empty threats. The other cop says it doesn't matter. The NYPD has a rep to uphold and they can't let citizens see them change their plans because of one criminal. So again, the police force in this universe, they do not take lightly to being made to look bad at their jobs, but they're bad at their jobs. And it seems to be a recurring theme across all universes with police officers. So we move on to page 5. We got Vulture landing on a rooftop. He's gloating. He thinks, I did it. Now that I've warned him, my triumph shall be even greater after I've seized the gem. And that's a quote. But Spidey's behind him, camera in hand. He's leaping down from the door of a roof, and he's thinking photos of the Vulture, if they come out right, will be worth a small fortune. So he's excited, he's rushing forward, but in his excitement, he knocks over a brick, and Vulture, hearing the sound, says he needs to move fast. In a beautifully drawn panel, we see him swoop above and behind Spidey, who's focused on getting the camera's adjustment right. I'm assuming he's working on the focus, and when he gets all the adjustments right, he looks up, but the Vulture's gone, and he's wondering where the man got off to. We know where the Vulture is. With his arms spread wide to slow his speed, he kicks Spidey full on in the back of the head with his left foot. So Spidey drops his camera and stumbles forward. And Spidey's dazed, and the Vulture, excited, says, quote, well, so Spider-Man himself is on my trail. Good. It will be amusing to finally face a foe worthy of my mettle. So the Vulture wants all the smoke. He's tired of dealing with these police officers who can't stop him. Nobody's called in the National Guard yet. We don't have Marines on scene. So nobody can stop the Vulture, and he's excited to be battling the premier superhero on Earth, the one, the only Amazing Spider-Man, and he's gotten off to a good start. He's kicked him in the back of the head. After the assault, Vulture throws a stunned Spidey over his shoulder and flies off with him easily in the direction of a water tower. So Vulture is shameless. He gets to the water tower and, holding Spidey by his feet, throws the web head inside. He says Spidey won't ever bother him again, but it can be argued Spidey's never bothered him at all. He and Spidey have never met each other. They know of each other, but they have never met, and as soon as they do meet, he assaults Spidey and throws him into a water tower. But still, he says Spidey's out of the way now and the city is his. Nobody's gonna stop him now. He took out the city's protector. That's all. That's it. Game, set, and match. Lincoln O Vulture for the win. So we move on to the next page, and Vulture flies off saying it's time for him to initiate phase 2 of his master plan. And I wonder if his phase 2 includes anything like Age of Ultron or anything along those lines. If so, I'm not too sure I want to get down with that. Meanwhile, the water inside of the tower has shocked Spidey awake. So Spidey's been thrown into this water. As soon as he hits the water, he wakes up and just starts treading water. He's swimming in place, and he's blaming himself for Vulture getting the drop on him. He says he shouldn't have been so careless, but at the same time, he says it's no big deal. He's going to web his way out, but when he tries, he realizes his shooters are empty. This is the second time we've seen Spidey run out of web fluid. If you recall, when he was trying to nab the chameleon in ASM number 1, he ran out in a critical moment. Right? The lights went out, He tried to web in the direction of the chameleon, and his web fluid was empty. So Spidey has got to really reevaluate how much ammo he's packing. So his web shooters are empty, so next he tries to climb the wall, but the walls are too slick with water and slime. So he has to change tactics. He says he can't tread water for much longer. He thinks that he's going to drown, but then he has an inspired idea. He remembers his muscles are way stronger than an average human's, and he should be able to use them. It's his body, he's in control of it, and right now he's going to put these muscles to work. We get this beautiful panel of him diving to the bottom of the tank and squatting down, and in the final panel on the page, he shoots up towards the roof of the water tower. Next page, first panel, we see him bursting through the roof of the water tower. He's saying he can't fly like the Vulture, but his spider strength has been pretty great at getting him out of jams. He makes his way back along the rooftops to where the Vulture attacked him and calls himself lucky. His camera is exactly where he dropped it. I love the panel of him picking up his camera. There's a little puddle of water behind him, a lot of inking so his costume looks wet. It's beautiful attention to detail. Shout out Steve Ditko. So Spidey goes home, he's taking off his mask, so Peter Parker is back on the scene. He's taking on his gloves, and we see him in his room, and he's holding a copy of Now magazine, of course. He's on the cover, and the headline is screaming for him to be caught. As always, Jameson is using the Daily Bugle, Jameson is using Now magazine, Jameson is using lecture tours. Whatever Jameson has to do to get us to understand that Spidey is a public menace, that's what Jameson will do, and that's where Jameson will be. I'm surprised he hasn't been on Dateline yet or 2020. Maybe those things weren't out then, but if they were, I'm sure Jameson would be on the show. So Pete's standing here, and he's wondering who he should sell the photos to, and knowing J. Jonah Jameson is the publisher of Now magazine, says he'd get a kick out of having his enemy cut a check for him. I don't want to go too much into my personal life on this front, but believe me when I tell you, there are very few greater feelings than getting people who slander your name to cut nice, fat checks for you. I know this, and Pete does too. He's going to make JJ pay him handsomely for refusing to put respect on his name. And he ain't going to say it no more. So with that decided, Pete gets back to work and he's learned his lesson. He says he originally made his Spider-Man costume for a life as Spionce, but now that he's been superheroing, he's got to add some extra web fluid capsules to his arsenal. He's run out versus the Chameleon, he's run out versus the Vulture, he's tired of it, we're tired of it, and he wants to make sure it won't happen again. So Pete's thinking progressively, what happens next? What happens next? I have to learn from my mistakes. Pete's thinking like ground control. The next panel, we get a close-up shot of his Spidey belt, and it looks much like Batman's utility belt before it became all militaristic and pouchy. It's just a silver belt with metal containers running along the length of it. Simple buckle, simple clasp. He puts the belt on, saying when he gets paid, he'll buy a miniature camera to stow in the buckle. So he's really going to go all in on this photography thing to the point where he's going to find a way to get a camera into his belt buckle. So he puts the belt on, and tucking it under his shirt, he says it's out of the way so he can jump, flip, run around without having to worry that it'll get in the way of his movements or effectiveness when he's fighting as Spider-Man. And in the final panel, we get Pete at his workstation, screwdriver in hand. He's working on a new device, and he says he thinks he knows how the Vulture got the power of flight. If he's right, he'll be able to stop the Vulture the next time they scrap. So Pete's not only a scientist, he's an engineer as well. And I should have realized that because he designs his web shooters and his belt. I mean, he even designed and made his own costume. Donatello Spisachi over here does it all. One-stop shop for superheroing is Peter Parker. We turn the page and we are now on the Infinity Page. Page 8. My favorite page in all of comics. Maybe it's because 8s are big in my life, or maybe it's just the idea that an 8 is an infinity symbol and it sounds cool to say Infinity Page. To me at least. But we move on to the Infinity Page and we have Pete. He's still in his Spidey costume. No mask, no gloves. At this point I'm wondering where Aunt May is. I don't know where she is, but it's hours later. Pete finishes the device he's been working on and he says he won't be sure if it works until he runs into the Vulture again. But right now, he's pooped, so he's going to get some rest. The next day, we're back outside of the J. Jonah Jameson Publishing building. JJ's on the phone off panel, and he's excited. Someone's got exclusive photos of the Vulture, and they want to sell. He tells them to get off the phone, stop wasting his time, and get down there so he can have a look at the pictures. He calls out to Joe, who I assume is the editor who brought him the hand-drawn pictures of the Vulture, so he's hired Joe back, and he tells Joe to stop the presses. So this is a big deal. Vulture, at this point, is the most famous villain the city has ever seen, and they finally got in a picture. They're going to know what this guy looks like. They're going to know what his suit looks like. They're going to be enthralled. They're going to be in awe. They're going to be in the mood to spend their coin on Now magazines and Daily Bugles, and J. Jonah Jameson gets to the bag. So a little time passes, and we're outside of JJ's office. His secretary is on the phone. She's got brown hair. She's got on a green top. There's a guy standing in front of her holding papers. And she's telling either the person on the phone or the guy or both that JJ is in an important meeting and he can't be seen by anybody. He can't see anybody and they can't see him. Busy man doing busy man things in that room, and you're not allowed in. You might not be busy enough. Behind a glass wall, JJ is speaking with someone. They're both outlined in blue. We can't see them, but JJ is drooling all over the pictures. He says, "These pictures are sensational. Great. How'd a kid like you get them?" And whoever he's speaking to says he'll sell the pics to JJ, but only if JJ never asks him that question. "I'm not telling you where I got these pictures. I got them. You want them. You got cash. I want it. Let's barter. You don't need the details outside of that. Let's stay inside of those lines." That's what the kid tells him. We get into the room with them, and we see JJ. He's still wearing his purple suit, blue tie. He's got his Reed Richards working. He's got a cigar on the side of his mouth, and he's talking to Pete. Pete's got on his everyday best, black vest, red tie, Steve Jobs pants, but now he's got a blazer on to match. When Pete's talking money, he's going to throw a blazer on. When you're talking money, you should throw a blazer on. Kids, someday you're going to be talking money, you go get that blazer and you throw that blazer on. And in this panel, JJ's responding to Pete's request of never asking him that question, and he's saying fine. He doesn't care how Pete got the pics, he's going to cut the check right now. Pete goes on to say he doesn't want his name used. He says JJ can give credit to a staff photographer. And I think this is a smart move on Pete's part. Again, he's thinking proactive, he's thinking ahead. It's better for me if I keep my identity secret. What happens if a person that I've taken pictures of, who is a supervillain, sees my name for the photog credit and comes for me? They come for me, they come for Aunt May, or if they come for me and they don't find me and they find May, oh man. So Pete's already thinking proactive. There are rules to being a superhero, and Pete's starting to catch on quick. He's starting to catch on quick. Always be prepared. Never, ever, in any way, tie your secret identity to your superhero identity. These are the rules, and Pete's learned them too, two of them, very quickly. And JJ, in response to this request of Pete not being named, he says, of course. He says he's happy about the deal, and says if Pete gets pics of Spidey, he'll really pay for those. So Pete smiles at this, and Pete thinks, brother, wouldn't you be surprised if you knew? Pete's a man of many tricks, and he's pulling the wool over JJ's eyes right now. He's having the man who hates him pay him. In the final panel, we're on the next day. Pete's leaving school, and Pete must not have been home. Pete's still wearing his blazer, so I'm convinced Pete met someone on his walk home. He got coffee with her. They hit it off. He got her number. They had a fizzy pop, and they went about their way. Nothing came from it. Pete's still kind of dorky. He hasn't really come into his own on the Peter Parker side of the equation. But that's what I assume happened because Pete's wearing the clothes from last night. He slept in Central Park. Don't read too much into this. So we're in the final panel, and Pete's leaving school with his classmates. Blondie's on scene. Moose is on scene. They're walking beside Peter. There's a brunette walking in front of him, and the brunette tells him to come with them downtown. They're all going to watch the diamonds being moved and hoping they can spot the Vulture. Pete asks if she really thinks the Vulture will try something with all the police around, and Moose says, don't worry, and he calls Pete a bookworm and says that they'll protect them. So we turn the page and we see that Pete went with them. They get downtown, and there are cameras set up. There's a giant crowd of people around. There's a lot of energy in the air. People are excited, and I don't think we see this very much anymore. People getting excited on the street to see someone passing by. I think in the 60s and earlier, I think before TV became an household item, I think before technology got to the point where you can have an answer to the whole world's questions in your pocket, these things were fascinating and interesting. To see $9 million worth of jewelry move down the street in an armored motorcade, that must have been exciting. And because of that, people were outside all the time in crowds. So there's electricity in the air, there's static in the air, and it always makes sense to me reading these comics that people are outside. So Pete says there are police, newspapermen, TV cameras, and calls the whole thing a carnival, and it really is a media circus. Moose says Vulture would be nuts. Nuts! That's the word he uses. Nuts! To try something here. There are just too many people. And Pete agrees with him. He looks up in a beautiful panel. He spots a police whirly-bird. He sees an officer on a rooftop across the street, and he says it is hard to see how the Vulture can make a move. The police are out in force. People are out and about, so they both got a point. If the Vulture is going to make a scene here, the Vulture is going to be dramatic and dangerous because who takes a shot when all of these people are around to stop them from taking this shot? So will Vulture show up? We're going to see. Pete decides to leave the crowd. He says he'll have a hard time getting out of the mob to turn to Spidey if the Vulture shows up. And it's a beautiful panel. He's walking forward. He's slightly hunched. He has his hands in his pockets. And we can see that he's walking this way because Moose is saying to Pete that Pete can't handle the action. That's why he's leaving. And he calls Pete delicate. I don't know what it is about the guys in this school, but anytime a person wants to leave, anytime Pete wants to leave, these are the insults he gets. And it's much like I would assume the insults Clark Kent probably got in his early days. So a few minutes later, we see the convoy move out. The diamonds are in a large gray armored truck. There's a police car in the front. There's a police car behind it. And the whole thing is being followed by a police chopper. We see a couple of cocky cops on the rooftop, and one of these itchy-fingered patrolmen says to the other, quote, "I wish the Vulture would make a try for those diamonds, Chuck. We'd nab him for sure." The other copper says, "Vulture's too smart for that." So these two have done literally nothing and are already talking smack like the Vulture didn't steal a fortune in bonds already in broad daylight at the start of this comic. So you have not stopped the guy. He's already ripped off the city for hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars. And you're saying you wish he shows up. Courting violence. Never court violence. You can react to it. Absolutely. It's your right to defend yourself. But I don't think anybody should be courting violence. The final panel, we see a man hop out of the back of the armored truck. He's got on a brown suit. He's got on a brown hat. He's holding a gold briefcase in his hands. And he is surrounded by at least 5 police officers. They've made a semicircle around the back of the truck, and they're all holding rifles. And one says, "All clear, bring the jewels out." Another says, "Vulture knows he wouldn't have stood a chance." Again, cocky like they've ever stopped him. Where was this gangster talk when the Vulture was vandalizing their precinct? Where was it? The Vulture threw a brick through your window. Right? Brick through your window, homie. Like, whoa, that's not the ball, but shout out to Black Rob, the immortal Black Rob. So we move on to page 10, and the brown suited man, he's walking forward. He's holding the golden briefcase that houses the jury in his hands. He's flanked on both sides by 2 officers. They must be walking in the street because there is a manhole cover in front of them. The police are looking up and all around. And the cop on stage right says the Vulture won't show, but the only cop who seems to realize and take serious the threat of the Vulture is on stage left, and he says to stay alert because, quote, "With a character like the Vulture, you never know what's gonna happen next." And he's absolutely right, because the very next panel, the Vulture bursts out from beneath the manhole cover and snatches the golden briefcase from the brown-suited man, catching every one of these cops off guard. This was his master plan. They were all looking to the skies, and the Vulture has shot up from the sewers. Think different. The cop who was on alert screams that they expecting an attack from above. I want to point out at this point that the Vulture is stronger than he looks for a man who seems to be pushing 70 years old. We saw him lift Spider and toss him into the water tower, no problem. And now he's tossing around manhole covers like they're lightweight. I looked it up, and according to whatthingsweigh.com, manhole covers like the ones found in New York City are usually upwards of 250 pounds. He threw that to the side with one hand. Vulture has flung this manhole cover aside, and these coppers thought they had a chance. They thought they had a chance. This 60-something-year-old man is tossing manhole covers to the side. He's stealing bonds in broad daylight. He's just snatched $9 million from you, and you thought you had a chance because you had bravado. Don't talk crap until you win. So Vulture takes to the sewers, making sure the manhole cover blocks his escape. He's flying through the tunnels. There's water beneath him. There's sewer roll all around him. He knows he'll be miles away before the cops catch up to him. And they don't know which way he's going through all these tunnels. But he flies out of the subway stop just above a train, and he's spotted by a guy on a subway platform. But Lincoln O Vulture wants to be seen. He thinks this will give the fool something to talk about for years to come. So if we know anything about the Vulture, we know the Vulture's got a huge ego. Such a huge ego. He flies out of the subway and says now he's going to take to the skies. But we get to the final panel, and Pete's not having it. He's heard the commotion. He's found a dark alley. He's shaking his shirt off his right shoulder. He's got his mask in his left hand. He's saying Vulture fooled everyone, even him, but he's going to get some new picks and name his price. So it's not about stopping Vulture because Vulture's a villain to Spider-Man. It's about Peter Parker's Aunt May needs rent money and I'm going to get these pictures. That's how he's going into it. And I think that may be how I would be going into it if I was a 15-year-old kid and I know how much money I just got paid for that first picture of the Vulture. So we get to page 11 and you already know Spidey's suited, Spidey's booted, he's scaling a wall and he's thinking how he'll never get over the fact that he can climb sheer walls. And sheer walls, they keep saying sheer walls, so I looked it up, and sheer walls are essentially support walls. They are the walls that hold up the building and support the roofs, basically. I assume that Spidey just means any vertical wall. Any wall that he can climb up and doesn't have to climb across. Across being upside down, walking left to right as opposed to walking north to south, if that makes sense. And I think at this point in the game, Spidey doesn't realize he can stick to ceilings as well. That would explain all the shots of him holding on to webbing attached to the ceiling, but I'm sidetracked. Back to the Spidey's on the rooftop, his spider sense goes off, and turning his head, he sees the Vulture fly right past him. This is the second time the Vulture's flown right past him. And the Vulture seems to be constantly flying past Spidey. Constantly. If you remember, Amazing Spider-Man number 7, Pete was looking for the Vulture, and the Vulture flew right past him. So this is a recurring theme. Started here. So the Vulture flies past him, And Spidey says, using his webbing, he'll follow the Vulture building to building. But Vulture's on edge. He's just robbed $9 million in diamonds, so Vulture's constantly checking over his shoulder for whirlybirds. So trying to dodge the whirlybirds, he looks back and he spots Spidey. And he shocks Spidey's free of his trap and says the wall crawler is too dangerous. So now he's finally putting some respect on Spidey's name, though to be fair, he seems to be the only person who puts respect on Spidey's name because he said Spidey was the only one that he could test his mettle against, so I take that comment back. Vulture says he's going to get rid of Spidey for good. He does another loop-de-loop, and of course, in the final panel, we have Spidey losing the Vulture despite the man having used this trick on him before in this issue. Spidey is easily fooled by a loop-de-loop. Any villains out there, if you want to stop Spider-Man, you loop the loop. And you got him. We get to page 12. Spidey may not have learned from it, but his Spidey sense sure has. He's standing on the edge of the roof. The Vulture is bearing down on him, but his spider sense goes off, and to dodge the Vulture, Spidey jumps back, arms wide, off the roof, fearlessly. I was worried at first because he has his camera in his hand, but we see he's smarting up on this too, and has it attached to his wrist by a strap. Imagine seeing a superhero these days and you see them in a brawl, and you see strapped to their wrist a camera. I would think this is the most lowbrow superhero ever. I would not want to be saved by them, which would suck to me because Spidey is amazing. That's my own bias would lead me to not being saved by the greatest. It's a fool's idea, but you got a camera strapped to your wrist and I'm supposed to take you serious, superhero? What's that about? So Spidey's in free fall. He webs the Vulture's foot, and he begins climbing up his web line to get to him. After the space capsule he wrote on last issue, this is nothing, and in no time at all, Spidey's managed to grab the Vulture's ankle, so now we're in the midst of the action shots from the cover and page 1. All of that stuff that's going on the cover and page 1, Spidey yanking feathers from the Vulture's wings, Spidey grabbing the Vulture's ankle about to punch him on page 1, that's all happening right now. Those are action shots. The cover and page 1 in these early issues, they're action shots, and they're usually taken from the thick of the action. So Spidey's got Vulture by the ankle, and Vulture tries to shake him free. Vulture screaming, quote, "You fool! Here in the sky, we're in my element. I'll shake you off and be rid of you for good." But Spidey's not worried. He climbs sheer walls, sheer legs, no problem. He says he's sticking around this time, and in a mini panel, we see him click the device he spent all night building while Aunt May was out partying. In the final panel, Spidey says the Vulture's been beaten, but he doesn't seem too worried about falling to his death at all. And Vulture's composure, if you remember from Amazing Spider-Man number 7, as it always does when the tide turns, his composure disappears, and he screams that Spidey's gonna kill them both. We turn the page and they're both in free fall, and Spidey is talking his smack. He says, "Speak for yourself, mister. The sky is my element as much as yours. Just watch." And that's a quote. And Spidey is so boss. Imagine he's falling with his back to the earth. He webs the side of a building to stop his fall. Meanwhile, the Vulture is falling to the earth, but he begins spiraling to slow his fall. And this must be where Spidey got the idea in issue 7 of spinning to reduce his speed. And Spidey watches the Vulture and he says he won't be able to use those wings anymore. And seeing a whirlybird flying in, he decides to make himself scarce, hoping to get a picture of the Vulture's capture. The copter spots the Vulture and starts to land. Vulture's on the rooftop. He's splayed out. He's beat, and he's thinking he can't even move. Spidey has beat this man into stillness. On the final panel, we see 2 police officers staring down at the Vulture. One's got his gun drawn, and he's taunting the Vulture. He says, "If this doesn't take the cake, whoever thought we'd be able to capture the Vulture so nice and easy? What happened, fella? Did you have a tailspin?" And Vulture's begging the cops not to tell jokes. "You don't get to tell jokes about me, dog. You didn't catch me, dog. Without Spider-Man, without that pesky Spider-Man, I would have been throwing rocks through your precinct every morning, evening, night. This city would have been totally mine. Don't joke with me. You did nothing." And all of this is happening, and hiding behind a sheer wall, we see Spider-Man snapping pictures saying they're going to be prize winners. So Spider-Man set out to get these pictures. He didn't set out to stop the Vulture. He set out to get pictures. He stopped the Vulture, but he got what he set out to do in the end. We turn the page, Spidey snapping one final picture of the retreating helicopter. He's going to ask for top dollar for these pictures, he says. Meanwhile, a police officer inside of the chopper says he can't wait to see the Vulture back at the station so they can figure out how he flies. And he disrespects the Vulture again. He takes the respect off of the Vulture's name that the Vulture signs in cursive, and he calls the Vulture Birdman. What happened to that boy? And Spidey overhears this. He's holding the doohickey in his hand, and he thinks, if they ask me, I could have told them. The absence of noise gave me the clue. I suspected that he had discovered a way to harness magnetic power. That's why my gadget made him fall. It's an anti-magnetic inverter. And it worked, quote unquote. So I've been thinking of Pete as a scientist who deals with beakers and vials and things like that. But Pete is very much an engineer. And it's becoming more and more apparent as these stories go on. I was looking at him in the wrong way. Pete is a technical scientist, which is what I consider engineers to be. From concept to holding in your hand. Next day, Pete's back in JJ's office. JJ had a long couple of days. He hasn't been home yet because he's still wearing his purple suit. He has Pete's photos scattered all around his desk, but he's all smiles. He wants to know how a teenager manages to get shots that his best photographers would trade their eye teeth for. Your eye teeth are your canines, for anyone wondering. And JJ is happy. And Pete says, remember our deal, my secret. He says if JJ doesn't want the pics, but before he can finish, JJ says, are you out of your mind? With pictures like these, I can almost stand living in the city with Spider-Man. Take a bonus and go out and buy yourself some Twist records. He gives Pete the cash for the pics and a bonus. Pete, counting his new wad of cash, says he likes that Jameson thinks he's just a teenage kid. He thinks this. But if Pete was a teenage kid, just an average teenage kid, I'm sure he'd go out and buy a Twist record and it'd be Bobby Darin. If you ask who, in response to the name Bobby Darin, all you need to know, he's just a Bronx boy who wrote the song Splish Splash, I Was Taking a Bath in like 5 minutes, and he has more #1 hits in his time than his contemporary, Old Blue Eyes himself, Frank Sinatra. So shout out to Bobby Darin, Bronx boy, and shout out to Frank Sinatra, Old Blue Eyes. I love you both. I'm not playing that game, which is better. Both did pretty good. So one time for the Boogie Down and our native son, Bobby Darin. And while I was rambling about the Bronx, Pete made it home to his house in Forest Hills, Queens. He's with Aunt May. She's wearing a brown shirt. She's got the apron on. They're in the living room, and he's giving May a wad of cash. And he says, quote, Aunt May, this money means you're not going to have to worry about anything again. I paid the rent for a full year, and tomorrow I'm buying you the newest kitchen appliances you ever drooled over. And Aunt May's looking up at him. She's got her finger pointing at him like, you rascal. There's love in her eyes. And she says she's so proud of him and that Uncle Ben was right. He is the most wonderful boy in the world. When all that feel-good feelings are going on, in the final panel of this comic, we've got the Vulture in his costume. They don't take the costume from him because his wings don't work anymore. So now he's just an old man in a strange bird suit. So they're doing this to humiliate the Vulture. They put the man in a cell and told him to keep your suit with your broken wings. And the Vulture's standing in this cell, and he's got a fist clenched in anger, and he thinks, I wouldn't be here if not for that accursed Spider-Man. But sooner or later, I'll get free and I'll develop a flying power that he cannot overcome. And then Spider-Man, it will be my turn to glow. And that brings us to the end of Duel to the Death with the Vulture. But to be fair, if you throw death in the title, somebody really should kick a bucket. What are you going to do? It was a great story. Let's take a little break, then jump into The Uncanny Threat of the Terrible Tinkerer. Me and my best friend Pete, old adventures, new critiques. He spins webs, I spin yarns. Kinda kooky, be forewarned. Look out, it's me and my friend Pete. Welcome back to Me and My Friend Pete. In this second half, we're going to cover the second story in this Amazing Spider-Man #2, The Uncanny Threat of the Terrible Tinkerer. This issue was scripted by Stan the Man Lee with art by the crowd reaction god Steve Ditko and lettering by Art, it's in the name, Simic. We're going to jump right in. We have a caption box on the lower right of this page, and it says, everybody loves a bargain, but sometimes it can be dangerous to accept a bargain which is too good to be true, especially if the bargain is being offered by someone like the Tinkerer who, but wait, let's see how it all began and how it took Spider-Man to finish it. And we see above the caption box is Spidey. He's got his arms and legs wide. He's standing outside of what looks like a dungeon door. And we have the Tinkerer shooting him with a very sophisticated looking ray gun. This is a continuation of the picture-in-picture box on the cover of Amazing Spider-Man #2. But from this angle, we see what the Tinkerer looks like. And the Tinkerer is an older man. Spidey's fighting a lot of old men right now. And the Tinkerer is an older man. He's got a bald head. He's got the Carl Winslow, you know, the hair wrapping around his head. So in the same way I say the Reed Richards for the hair on top, white sides, the Carl Winslow is a baldy on top with just hair on the side, hanging on for dear life. It's a good look for black men mostly. I don't really see white men pull it off too well. It's a very sage-like look. So he's an old man, bald head, really long face. He's got bushy eyebrows, and he has on a pair of square-rimmed glasses. And they're up and they're sitting on his forehead. And he's wearing a tweed jacket, a white shirt, green pants. And those green pants may be Pete's green pants. After he got rid of them and his life started looking up again, he got rid of the green pants and he went back to his Steve Jobs blues, dropped them off in Goodwill, and maybe the Tinkerer picked them up from there. We don't know, but the Tinkerer's wearing brown shoes as well. Seems like the basic fit for an older man in the 60s. So we get to page 2, and Pete's in the science lab. It's after class. Flash is here. He's got on a black sweater with a snazzy triangle rectangle design on the center. It's a really beautiful sweater, Flash. Blondie's here. She's doing green blouse. She's doing purple pencil skirt. The brunette who invited Pete downtown to watch the jewelry transported, she's here. She's got on the blue top, blue skirt, and class is over. But our friend Pete is still hard at work and looking good doing it. He's got on a red sweater vest. He's got his Steve Jobs blues on. He has on a pinstripe shirt with a black tie. And he's still hard at work. I'm really, really liking Pete's fashion choices right now. He looks so stylish. Good for you, Pete. Stun on him. Stun on him. But Pete's still hard at work. And Brunette says she's glad class is over, that she's over staring at science equipment. And Blondie tells her to be quiet. Blondie says that Brunette will break Pete's heart talking like that because he loves this stuff. But if Pete hears them, he doesn't care. He's holding a file in one hand. He's got a round bottom boiling flask in the other. And the look on his face is quiet focus. His professor comes in with a professor named Cobwell. Cobwell by name? Cobbs very well by reputation. Yeah, baby, yeah. Well, Cobwell's wearing a green suit, red tie. He's got shock white hair. He's got bushy eyebrows and mustache. And Pete's professor says that Cobwell needs some help with research. Of course, Pete jumps at the chance, and Cobwell thanks him for it. Cobwell reaches into his wallet and he gives Pete 2 cards. One's his address. The other's the address of a repair shop he wants Pete to visit before he helps with the experiments tomorrow. He wants Pete to pick up a radio, and Pete says he'll be happy to do it. You know, in these moments, this is how you make connections. When someone asks you for a favor and it's something small and it's on your way to them, you do it. You build up a good rapport. This is what they call the one hand washing the other, and Pete knows how to use the soap. The teacher and professor leave, and after a few minutes, Flash's salt spills all over the room. He says, well, so teacher's pet is gonna help the nice little doctor with some experiments this weekend, eh? While us other dumbheads waste time having dates and living it up. But Pete is not having it today. He's feeling confident. He's feeling seen. He's got on a red vest, so he's not shook. He shoots back. He says, knock it off, Flash. You're darn right I'd jump at the chance to work with a brilliant man like Dr. Cobwell. As for you being a dumbhead, it's nothing to be ashamed of. You were just born that way. And he gets out of there. He takes off before Flash can think of a comeback. And waiting for Flash to think of a comeback, let's be honest, we'd be waiting a long time because Flash self-admitted to being a dumbhead. I don't have time to sit around and wait for dumbheads to make a comeback. If you say something snarky and I say something snarky and you don't got a comeback, I win. I got the last hit. Them's the rules. I didn't make these rules, but here they are. Got you last is a real thing. And it's not only in the world of physical assault. The next day, Pete's in his bedroom. He's getting ready to head out to help the professor with his experiments. He has his Steve Jobs blues on. He's pulling the top half of his Spider-Man costume over his head. He's got the belt on his waist. And he's saying he's going to wear his costume because he doesn't know when he'll need it. And he feels undressed without it. So his Spider-Man persona is starting to mean more and more to him. To the point where he needs it under his clothes just in case. He feels naked without it now. So he's been adventuring a little bit. And it looks like Pete's been bitten by the bug. Superheroing bug. Very contagious. I think he got it from the Fantastic Four in issue 1. Because if you think about it, he didn't fight any superpowered menaces until after he met them. So Pete throws on his tweed jacket and he heads out to pick up the doctor's radio. And in the final panel we see he gets to the Tinkerer's repair shop and he says that the name is offbeat. He calls the Tinkerer a kook and goes inside. Pete says this out loud. You know, Pete's always monologuing. To say it out loud, I think, makes him a jerk. We are allowed to think whatever we want. There are no thought police. I hope there is never a point in history where thought police exist. But the fact that he says it out loud and he's put it into the world that way and you're calling someone you never met a kook, that's lowbrow, Pete. Let's be a little bit bigger than that. But I want to point out that the Tinkerer's workshop looks like the New York Cancer Hospital, located on Central Park West. It's a red brick building. It looks kind of like a castle. It has all these rounded, there are really no corners on that building that I've seen. Every corner is a rounded castle tower. They all look like castle towers. And that's what the Tinkerer's shop reminds me of. It reminds me of the New York Cancer Hospital on Central Park West. So we move to page 3, and Pete's inside of Tink's shop. There are clocks, there are radios, they're all around him, and he meets the Tinkerer, who introduces himself as the Tinkerer. Spidey's villains do not use real names. I wonder if that's a conscious effort on Stan Lee's part, because if you don't use names, it removes that humanized connection. I'm not going to take any person seriously as a person who walks up to me calling themselves the Vulture. Or I'm not going to take them seriously at first until I get over that hurdle. So when I see the Vulture and the Tinkerer and the Chameleon especially, when I see all of these supervillains refusing to use their real names, I think it may have been a conscious effort on Stan the Man's part to keep them separate from us. Because if you have no real name to me, you don't have any real identity to me, and it's easy for me to root against you, despite how cool you may be. Because to me, the Vulture is extremely cool, but the Vulture signs his name the Vulture, so it puts up a wall between us because I signed my name Gerald Kelty Jr., and it's just different. Back to, Pete says he's here to pick up the radio, and he hands Tink the ticket for it that Dr. Cobwell gave him. Tink takes the ticket. He's nearsighted, so he lifts his glasses to read it, and he says he'll go grab the radio while Pete's standing here, hands in pocket, thinking that Tink looks like a Grimm's fairy tales character. But Pete doesn't say it out loud, so that's a little bit of a difference. We're allowed access into his mind, shouldn't be judging a person for what's going on in their head. I'm not the thought police. I'm not any police. I would never be. Abolish the police. But Pete's only thinking it, so I guess it's fine. But immediately after, his spider sense goes off. And if I'm remembering correctly, we get the first use of Pete's spider sense going off where half his face is drawn with the Spider-Man mask on it. It's a beautiful panel. This is, in all of comics, my favorite thing. It's my favorite image to see in comics. Pete with half his face Pete and half his face Spider-Man. I don't know what it is about it, because fun fact, true fact, my favorite Batman villain is Two-Face. And maybe it's just because when you have two things happening on one face, you've hooked me. You got me. I'm already sold. I'm easy. I'll admit it. I'm easy for it. Back to my favorite toy ever was the 1995 McDonald's had a Spider-Man the Animated Series toy set, and one of the toys was a Peter Parker, camera in hand, whose head could flip from normal Pete to Spidey Sense's tingling Pete. It's the best graphic in comics. So Pete's Spidey Sense goes off and he thinks it's picking up odd electrical impulses, but tells himself he has to stop being so suspicious. He thinks the Tinkerer, quote, looks about as dangerous as a second-hand cream puff. Pete is out of line with this man in his mind. He's going all out. He's called him Grimm's fairy tale, called him a kook before he walked into the shop. And now he's saying that he looks like a secondhand cream puff. So Pete's thinking all this crap, and then at the end of it, he's like, even if I were suspicious, he's a weakling. I can handle him. That's not cool, Pete. Don't be arrogant. But while Pete's thinking this, Tink's descending the stairs in the next panel, and he's headed towards a large blue steel door. He enters through the door into a soundproof basement room. We can only see a pair of green hands, but they're working on the radio, and Tink says Cobwell is ready for his radio, that it's one of their special jobs. The next panel, we get a good look at the body the green hands belong to, and it's an alien. He's got antennas, he's got green skin, he's got a heavy brow, he's got a head that looks like a butt facing the ceiling. He's into the nightlife, he's wearing a black crop top and purple underwear, and a purple belt. He says he's inserted the special device into the radio and the good doctor won't suspect anything at all. In the final panel on this page, we see this isn't the only alien here. There's at least one more behind him working on a futuristic looking piece of machinery. Tinkerer grabs the radio saying none of their special customers will suspect a thing, and the alien says of course not. But they still have to be careful. No one can know of their plan until they're ready to strike. We turn the page and the Tinkerer has climbed back up the stairs. He's given the radio to Pete. And Pete's more than a little shocked that the Tinkerer, for all of his labor, is only charging a dime for fixing the radio. So Pete's been tossed ruthlessly into a world of capitalism with the death of his Uncle Ben. And if there's one thing he's learned quickly, is that you gotta make the donuts and you can't do that on dimes. Tink says, don't worry about it. He charges so little because it brings in lots of customers. And that may make sense. You lower the price, you get more customers, it offsets that price drop that you've created. At least I think that's how it works in basic economics. Pete doesn't respond. He heads out to meet Dr. Cobwell. We see him and Dr. Cobwell. They have their lab coats on. They're in Dr. Cobwell's laboratory. Dr. Cobwell has on some green tweed pants. And Pete must have mentioned the low price because Cobwell is telling him he only went to Tink because the price was so cheap. He starts explaining to Pete the experiment that he's once done, but Pete has become fixated on the Tinkerer. He's thinking, I still don't get it. The Tinkerer must be losing money on every customer. And he didn't look like a nut to me, so what's his angle? Nobody gives anything for nothing. And dimes don't make donuts. But Pete's got work to do, so he tells himself to push Tink from his mind, and he gets to that work. He's got a distillation kit hooked up. He's got a small round bottom flask in his hand. And you know, scientists gon' science, so Pete gets right to work. But his spider sense goes off again. Whatever he was sensing in that shop is here too, and he's thinking the Spider-Man in him is reacting to it. He looks around the lab, he spots the radio, and he wonders if the electrical impulses are coming from the radio, because it's suspicious if it is, because this radio is switched off. Next panel, we see Dr. Cabo. He's sliding his green tweed jacket on. He's got a lecture at the Institute. I'm sure he means the Fashion Institute because good style is a science. No? Everybody's a critic. He says he'll be back in a few hours, and as soon as the door slams behind him, Pete says it's time to investigate. The next page we see Pete, he's cracking the radio open, he spots the special device, and I think we can assume Pete's taken a radio apart before because he says no ordinary radio has guts like this. He says he's through kidding around, bringing it back to Pete being an engineer and understanding these things. The next panel, you already know. Pete's suited, Pete's booted, and Spidey is web swinging onto the scene. The scene, the Tinkerer's shop. He drops in through a skylight, a little breaking and entering action, and surrounded by darkness, his spider senses trip again. He finds the stairs to the basement, and he's thinking it's not a basement. He thinks that it's more like a concrete reinforced dungeon. That's a quote. But Spidey's lucky. The door of this dungeon is open, and he creeps towards the door. Inside of the basement laboratory, we have 3 aliens working. They're tapping computer screens. They're flipping switches. They're moving around in the background. And in the foreground, Tink, like all villains, is monologuing. He says,
"Yes. Our electronic spy devices hidden in radios belonging to important Earthlings have enabled us to learn much about their strengths and weaknesses before we attack the unsuspecting planet."
An alien commands him to be quiet and says he's processing the latest pictures from a radio that they've, air quotes, repaired for a military leader. The next page, we have Tink and an alien. They're standing in front of one of the TV monitors, and Tink's saying his devices never fail. And the alien tells him to shut up again so he can hear. So Tink obviously talks too much. On the monitor that they're staring at, we see the general, and this general is discussing plans for the defense of the eastern seaboard. All this is going on. Spidey's watching it. He's hidden behind the door at the entrance of the dungeon. He doesn't seem surprised at all that there are little green men using spy devices to find out military and scientific secrets. But while he's thinking on it, one of the crop top aliens comes up behind him and his spider sense goes off. The alien fires a ray gun at Spidey, and with no choice, Spidey dives into the spy room. An alien lunges at him, calling him a costumed earth creature while the Tinkerer looks on. But Spidey flips out of the reach of that alien, and another one who comes to help, and Spidey's saying, "You can try to seize me, but quote, it's not gonna be that easy, buddy boy." And when he flips, he says, "See what I mean?" So already, throwing the quips out. He runs up the wall to avoid them, the sheer wall, as an alien beneath him points out that he can scale sheer walls. So everybody is amazed at the idea that Spidey can climb these sheer walls. All this is happening and the Tinkerer is livid. He's behind the alien. He's shaking the angriest fist on planet Earth up at Spidey. He tells the aliens that Spidey ain't no ordinary Earthling and they need to get him now. Get that man down from that wall because that man is dangerous. That's what the Tinkerer is throwing at these aliens. And all the aliens we see, they're beneath him and they're losing it. One screams that if Spidey escapes, knowing what he knows, their plans are wasted. Just before radio is hurled up at Spidey, causing him to lose his grip on the ceiling. To be fair, Spidey should have known he had no chance. Ceilings are not sheer walls. He should have never broken off of that sheer wall and went straight to the ceiling. He can't handle the ceiling yet. He just got the powers. He can't handle the ceiling yet. He should have had the little web strand that he was constantly holding. What happened to that, Spidey? Why don't you have it? He played himself. Back on the ground now, Spidey's immediately jumped by 3 of the aliens, and they say he's going to be rendered helpless by their sheer numbers. But Spidey's not having that. He says it's been tried before, and we see him burst free of their grip, sending them all flying. One alien screams,
"His strength is greater than we suspected."
Another shouts,
"He shook us all off. A weapon. We need a weapon."
But Tink's ready for this. He hops on the scene. They need a weapon. Tink's got weapons. Using the ray gun from page 1 of this story, he blasts Spidey in the back, knocking Spidey unconscious. We see Spidey laid out on the floor, and the Tinkerer says a normal man would be dead, but Spidey is not a normal man. Tink says,
"It would have killed him. Any normal human. but it merely stunned him.
An alien, he's not trying to hear that. Spidey's stunned, that's perfectly fine. He says to put Spidey, he calls Spidey a specimen. He says put Spidey in the cage before the specimen wakes up. They toss Spidey into a clear domed, half-circle prison. Tink says nothing can break out of this resisto glass, which is an old-timey, much better way to say bulletproof glass, and says the only problem they have now is finding a way to get rid of Spidey. And it's a great panel. Spidey is inside of this bulletproof prison. He's rubbing his head, and he's trapped. And on the final panel, we get a great close-up shot of the Tinkerer. He and I have the same type of eyes. My eyelids sit very low at times and it can look like my eyes are closed. That's what's happening here with Tink. And he's saying Spidey is the only person who knows about their plans. An alien agrees and says there is not a question to be had. Spidey has to be destroyed. The alien then says to release the air from the prison. So his plan is to suffocate Spider-Man. And if we're talking about cruel ways to off-switch someone, that to me is top 5. I think we take for granted how easily our bodies breathe in, breathe out. The idea of being suffocated, the idea, that is horrifying to me. We turn the page. We're on page 8. The Infinity Page. And things go down. An alien has walked over to the control panel of the prison and he presses a button saying Spidey won't be menacing them for much longer. Spidey is squished inside of his prison. He thinks he needs to act fast and he notices that the control panel the alien is working at controls his prison. He also notices that the air in the prison is being forced out through tiny holes in the bottom of the resisto glass. He thinks instead of killing him, those holes are going to be what saves his life. So these aliens are trying to force the air out, but there are these little holes along the bottom of the cell, and Spidey's going to use that to save his life. The next panel, we get a close-up of Spidey's web shooter and how it's designed. The cartridges of fluid wrap around his wrist, connected to an adjustable spray nozzle, and to make it shoot, there is a release button on his palm connected to the cartridges on his wrist. This thing is so perfectly engineered, Spidey even threw a safety on it, so I assume the shooters don't spray when he's trying to clobber someone. In the next 3 panels, we see Spidey line his wrist up with one of the holes. He turns the safety catch off, and he fires. Does Spidey get the hit? Of course he gets the hit. Spidey always gets the hit. And nobody sees. The cage opens from the bottom. He falls free, and an alien spots him. And I'm sure they know they're in for a world of hurt. The final panel on this page is proof. Spidey clocks the alien shouting that he's escaped, saying, "Who do you think you are, the town crier? Mind your business. Here, take this. Mind your business." Out here shouting. The alien goes crashing into another alien who had a ray gun drawn, ready to gun Spidey down. Which begs the question, if one shot stunned Spidey before, why didn't Tink just double tap? Bow, bow. Why didn't he just do that? I'm not going to give any villain advice though. It's me and my friend Pete. I'm always rooting for Spidey. And the alien with the gun calls the one who crashes into him a fool because the ray gun goes off and he shoots the control panel, immediately causing a fire. All this Spidey goodness just went down where? On the Infinity Page. We get to page 9 and there is fire and smoke everywhere. The aliens say that it'll take months to repair that control panel, and fearing Spidey's power, they break for the door with the Tinkerer racing behind them shouting, "Wait, don't leave me, don't abandon me," as the fire from the panel grows larger and larger. Spidey's not bothered by the fire though. He leaps over it, he tackles the Tinkerer, and we see Spidey has a bit of a patriot in him. He says, "Hold on there, laughing boy, you're not going anywhere. They were just doing their duty to whatever planet they were from. But you traitor!" Still, Spidey plans on saving the Tinkerer, but with the fire raging out of control and the Tinkerer struggling, shouting, "No, let me go. Take your hands off me. Nobody touches the Tinkerer." Spidey is forced to let him go or he's going to die. Spidey crawls through the air vent and we see he reaches the roof and he's glad he's okay but says the building will be ashes in minutes. He hears sirens and fire engines and he needs to get out of there now. As he does, he's spotted swinging away on a web by one of the people on the ground. They're too small to see what they're wearing. You know I care about the fashion, but they're way too small. Spidey is up there. I'm sorry, I can't see. He's one green, stick figure-ish looking person on the ground. And he's saying that maybe Spider-Man started the fire. And he's not wrong on the technicality. Spidey did clock one alien into another alien who was holding a ray gun, who shot the ray gun that hit the control panel that started the fire. But I don't know why he swallowed the fly. I guess he'll die. We get to the final page of this story and we see a rocket ship. It's very Jetsons looking, futuristic, lots of curves, not too many sharp angles, and it's taken off from what I assume to be the Great Lawn of Central Park. It has to be. It's a clearing with skyscrapers not too far off. There's nowhere else in the city where a park is set up like that. These aliens were hiding in plain sight on the Great Lawn of Central Park. That's where they were. That's it. And we see Spidey has just saved the Earth from prying alien eyes as the aliens say, "Safe at last.
Press the button which will destroy all our spy devices by remote control. It is done. We can never again return to Earth. They will be on guard from this day on. And they're saying this while they're taking off, so Pete's just unwittingly saved the planet from a hostile espionage attempt by aliens. The next panel, we got Pete. He's back in his lab coat. He has his black button-up shirt on. He's got his Steve Jobs blues on. And he races back to Caldwell's lab and checks the radio to find out it's working normally again. So Caldwell comes in. We can tell by how he's drawn. He's speed walking. He's excited. And he tells Pete he could swear he just saw a spaceship fading into the atmosphere. And Pete asks what it looked like. But like most men with some status, Caldwell is afraid to look stupid or crazy, so he says he's just going to shut up about it because he doesn't have proof and he doesn't want people treating him like the stereotypical absent-minded professor. And Pete doesn't fight him on it. He just agrees. Caldwell walks away, a hand running through his hair, and he's thinking that he was so sure. But if he's not going to be confident about it and spit it out into the world, it's just going to be on the back of his mind. For the rest of Caldwell's life, he's going to be thinking about that night that he saw that alien spaceship take off from Central Park. It's going to be on his mind for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, Pete hasn't even waited until the man's left the room. He's holding the Tinkerer's face in his hands, and he's saying if he didn't have the mask, he wouldn't believe it either. So he's in the same boat as the professors at the end because he can't ever talk about Spidey's adventures without people getting suspicious of Peter Parker. And that's very true. Why do you know so much about these things that Spider-Man gets into? With the Tinkerer's mask in his hands, however, it makes me wonder, is Tinkerer an alien? Will we ever see the Tinkerer again? Will that be explained? We don't know. The final panel of this comic, we get Spidey. He's standing here. There's a yellow background. The background is covered in webbing, and beneath him it says, quote, "The beginning of more and greater Spider-Man adventures starting next issue." So I think that's amazing because this is the first time that at the end, they didn't call it the end. They called it a beginning. So that brings us to the end of the main episode. Thank you so much for tuning in with me for this episode of Me and My Friend Pete. I had so much fun reading these stories, and I hope you did too. If you're a patron, shoot on over to patreon.com/HSPP to check out the bonus episode. This week, we have Superman Volume 2, Number 8, Future Shock. It's me and my friend Pete's first foray into the DC universe, and you can't spell DC without Superman, and you can't say you know Superman without knowing the Legion of Superheroes. If you're not a patron, shoot on over to patreon.com/HSPP and sign up now. We'd love to have you. The more the merrier, I always say. Next week's main episode, an Octoped Slugfest as Spider-Man takes on one of his top 5 villains all time, dead or alive, the one, the only, Dr. Octopus. You don't want to miss that. For patrons who are part of the High Council, High Society tier, we have the poll up for the choices of the independent comic that we get into in a couple of weeks. And the choices are The Authority number 1, December 2006, Wildstorm. Witchblade number 80, November 2004, Top Cow. Hunter Killer number 8, November 2006, Top Cow. The Darkness number 4, June 2008, Top Cow. And War Heroes number 2, September 2008, Image. So shoot on over if you're a High Society, High Council patron. Shoot on over and cast your vote. I've already cast mine, but the way that I want this to be, my vote means nothing in the face of yours. If it's a 1-1 vote, I go with yours. I've read the stories already, and I want to give you what you want. Power to the patrons is what I always say. Please like, please comment, please subscribe, please share, please take care, please think of the world, and please be true to yourself. And remember, with great power, you know the rest. You know it. Make sure you're being responsible. I'm out of here.